Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and today I am so thrilled to have Becca Powers with us. She is the author of A Return to Radiance, which is with my publisher, New World Library, and it's such a great book, and I want to give you a little info about Becca, and then we'll say hello. So Becca Powers is an international keynote speaker and USA Today bestselling author. She's a Fortune 500 sales executive and creator of the Dragonfly Effect, which she leads as a transformational movement, inspiring high performers to embrace change, purpose, and personal impact. With over 20 years of experience, Becca has spoken at organizations like Cisco, Dell, and Royal Caribbean. Through her books, A Return to Radiance and Harness Your Inner CEO, her podcast, The Empowered Half Hour, and her proprietary Power Method, Becca empowers individuals to achieve success and fulfillment, to live a life aligned with their highest potential. Welcome to the program, Becca.
That intro always makes me blush. I'm like, oh, it sounds like I do a lot of things. Wait, I do a lot of things.
You do, and you excel at a lot of things, including being a podcast host. And we first connected through our mutual fantastic publisher when I was a guest on your podcast, The Empowered Half Hour. And I had such a great time with you.
Oh, it's such a good conversation. We were like instant friends.
It was. And then after the conversation, like after the taping, I said, so what's going on with you? And then you talked about your project and you told me the title. And I said, oh my God, that's so exciting. Keep me in mind. And so Becca had my publisher send me an advance copy. And I was so pleased to write a blurb for it. I'm just going to read to you the blurb that I said. A Return to Radiance is a much-needed hands-on guide through the often rocky terrain of business, self-worth, and spiritual and material actualization. Becca Powers, creator of the lauded Power Method, invites readers to sip from her deep reservoir of knowledge and offers specific steps toward fulfillment. She channels the generous spirit of spiritual thinking pioneers like Shakti Gawan, along with the business acumen of Adam Grant, to help you unlock abundance and manifest the limitless potential in your career and life. This book is soul food, lighting the way toward confidence and prosperity for today's professionals.
Oh my gosh, I'm beaming. Like when I received that from you, so many things were going through my head, but just like the comparison that you gave, I was like, nailed it. I'm like, it's got the spiritual and like the business acumen. Like just the fact that you were able to say that made me feel very proud because you wouldn't have said it if you didn't believe it.
Absolutely. And I felt that there's so many aspects of your book that I love, and we're going to get all into it. So I just love the book. I loved your message. I am a huge believer that we are all energy. Everything is energy, and working with the energy can help manifest your goals and your beliefs, and taking steps towards it is key as well, which is what you talk about in the book. You not only talk about the underlying spiritual component of success, and success, like in whatever that means to whatever the
Right.
person is. It's not just business success, it's success in your personal life and how you act in the world. And you also use your background as a yoga instructor to offer specific positions that somebody can use. That I think that was so supportive. Plus, I'm a big believer in like sidebars and real practical steps. So you give the sections, grab your gemstone. We're talking about radiance, so it's bringing that out, and power thoughts. And for the yoga, you have the power up your practice. So let's talk first of all about why you wrote the book and kind of the beginnings of how it all came to be.
I would love that. And, the book starts with me sharing a story of my dad on stage. And the first time I recall seeing someone's radiance, I was about 7 years old. My mom took me to a bar. Now, guys, like, listen, this is the 1980s, so this is what moms did. No, I'm just kidding. And but I remember my mom bringing me to the bar, and I grew up with musician parents, so like seeing my parents play was nothing new. But it was the first time I saw my dad play in front of an audience. And I just remember the awe of like the stage lights and the haze from the cigarette smokes. And then his ability to play a classic song like Comfortably Numb, note for note, and the audience anticipation, and then them rising and doing a standing ovation. And it was so magical. It got me to thinking prior to starting to put this book together that wow, there's a radiance to all of us, right? Like in Kundalini Yoga, we talk about radiance being the highest expression a human can have. When you've embodied your soul into this human experience, the highest expression of that is your radiance. And so, like, all these concepts started dripping together. And I'm like, wow, I'm like, what if our radiance is like truly a real thing that contains our potential, that contains our talents, our gifts, and our strengths? What if instead of like trying to learn something new or overdevelop something, we just had to return to our radiance? And, so that was such a delightful concept to play in. But then there's the serious side, which I talk about very early in the book too, that in this modern day of everyone trying to fit societal norms of have a job, have a kid, have a house, have a this, have a that, people are disconnected from their radiance. Depression's on a rise. Even death for working professionals is the high, like the statistics, we're at the highest levels of heart attacks, cancer, and things like that than we've ever been before. And so I had this like other thought was like, oh, we're disconnected from our radiance. Like, if we were able to return to it, could we reduce those things? And the answer is yes.
I love that. I love that for the title because I always say to my students, even when they're writing an essay, active verbs make titles resonate for the editor who's your first reader. And it also encapsulates kind of the action of what it's about. And so a return, the return, that's the active
Ooh,
verb
I
in
get
your
the
title.
goosebumps. Yeah. Like, oh, it feels so good.
And by the way, your expertise as somebody in sales and somebody in business really comes through in the book too, with the subheads throughout. I
Yes.
think they're really, really strong. Boundaries are your best friend. You use a lot of alliteration, which as an editor, that's something that I do and tell my students. And again, the active power up your choices, the BS that holds you back, the alliteration BS back,
Yes.
break up with burnout, all that's, it's just really, really great. So, can you talk to me about the power method? I know this is your method, your proprietary method that you imbue in the pages of the book.
Yeah. So I did form a proprietary method because I felt like things were missing because I'm in the business world and I'm also in the spiritual world. Like I've got both feet firmly in both. I was like, things are either so esoteric or so academic or psychology based that like layman is just, it's missing. And people are struggling to find how to regain or return, reclaim like that. It's really hard. Like some people are really deep in their spiritual practice and the practical piece is missing, and other people are just kind of like flirting around their trauma and therapy and stuff like that, and they're missing the spiritual. So I built it so that it stacks on each other so that we start practical. The first two are really, I feel, are about prioritizing your well-being and mastering your mindset. I feel like that's the P and the O. And then the W, we move into worthiness. So if I'm sharing the acronyms for the listeners, because they're not able to look at this right now, the P is protect your potential. And that's where you get to work on starting to prioritize your well-being. The O is own your opportunities. This is where you're mastering your mindset and really taking control over your life. The W is waking your worthiness. And this is really important for both sides of this fence, as I'm talking like the business and the spiritual or whatever, because a lot of times it's so wild because we are born inherently worthy of having, our success, our happiness, our health, our relationships, and we're so disconnected from that. So like I have worthiness right in the center of that because I feel it's that important. And then I'm moving more on to the spiritual side, which the E is elevate your energy. That's where you were, referencing that there's some yoga stuff in there and there's some chakras. And then the R is rocking your radiance. That's about like embodying who you truly are. And when you do, this beautiful thing happens as you make a beautiful impact in the world. So I tried to like start it from like, hey, you got to kind of get your stuff together to like, hey, you're this beautiful expression of a being, like share it with the world and make a difference.
That's great. And the way you break it down, exactly as you said, part one, protect your potential. Part two, own your opportunities. Part three, waken your worthiness. Part four, elevate your energy. Part five, rock your radiance, with like 4 or 5 chapters in each
Yes.
section.
Mm-hmm.
You had your power principle that you'd put together. So how did you think about structuring the book? Was it something intuitive because you already had the breakdown for the power?
It was very intuitive, but I also did a lot of research with it too. So I went back to study some psychology 101s or like founding principles. Like I looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and
Yes.
things like that, just to make sure that, maybe I was in alignment with common theories. And that was a really good assurance because once I started doing some psychology referencing, I'm like, oh, actually, I'm in a good space. But, from a writing perspective, I was like, once I had that security within myself that I was laying a foundation that was strong, then I just really wanted to anchor myself into that teaching. And so, like you said, there's 4 or 5 chapters to support each, pillar. And I wanted to make each chapter stack on each other, but also be independent. So as you've read the book, like I wanted to make it something that could be read cover to cover, but then also be like, you know what? I need to work on my values. I'm coming back to this chapter. Or I need to work on my boundaries. I'm coming back to this chapter. So as a writer, I wanted it digestible, each theme digestible to the reader.
Yes, it's very actionable. It gives practical, specific tips. And it's also like if you say something about work burnout in the workplace, you give statistics and you give
Yes.
references, which supports the credibility of what you're saying. Statistics
Yes.
and polls, as long as they're integrated, which it is integrated into the material. And you do something else, you imbue the book throughout with your own stories, which I really like because it brings
Awesome.
it to life. So much so that you talk about your parents having lost their radiance and becoming depressed, and your
Yes.
brother who had different addiction issues. I'm
Yes.
sorry you lost him. Yeah.
Yes.
And you talked about your own kind of burnout situation. And so you brought little pieces of that. So, how hard was that to do, or was it something that you always knew you wanted to do?
The answer is both.
Okay.
So It was hard. I think as a writer, you want the experience for the reader to feel natural, to feel organic, to feel insightful, and like all these different drips. And to master that as a writer is hard. We have fabulous editors at New World Library, so I'm very, very thankful. And I did get some challenges back from my editor to on ways to do this with better like tact or better landing. So in some instances, she was like, go stronger into your teacher and then come back down, or stay stronger in your personal story here because it's very supportive for the teaching that you have following. So it was learning how to kind of massage where to storytell and where to teach. And it was probably the most challenging but most rewarding writing experience I've had yet.
So it's interesting because you had a book before this.
Yes.
And so people who are familiar with that book are familiar with your voice. And also through your podcast, The Empowered Half Hour, people are familiar with your voice. So I think it's really important to say that like your voice comes through very clearly as your voice in
Yes.
here, which is
Mhm.
another challenge for a book that is instructive, giving
Yes.
advice and information and perspective, but you also come very strongly through.
Thank you. And that was also a hard part as a writer. It's like, because when you teach, your voice does change sometimes, right? You go into an authority. And I wanted to write in authority, but still keep my tone. It ended up landing really well, but there was, in some areas, maybe two or three rewrites.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge. What are some of the other challenges in writing the book that you dealt with?
I think that when you're writing something that is prescriptive, so I have a power method and there's five chapters in each pillar. So I wanted uniformity across the book. And so, even from an outline perspective, I was like, I wanted the 5 and 5. I'm a numbers person. I like that. But I was like, I can't just have 5 and 5 because I like that. Like it needs to add value, right?
Right.
And so then I really needed to like make sure that each pillar had 5 strong chapters. Not only that they were strong, but they followed that like that hero's journey, right? That like
Right.
human transformational arc. And so that took a lot of massaging and changing the order of chapters and things like that to make sure that when I took that step back, that I felt I was offering the best path to return to the radiance in the best order possible. So that was really tricky to lay it all down.
And you also shared your journey, so how you returned to radiance,
Yes.
because you're the original subject of
Yes, I
this.
was. I was. It's true.
So there's a section that you talk about in part two, turn strengths into
Oh,
superpowers.
yes, I love that chapter. Chapter
Yes, yes,
9.
it's so interesting. And I was thinking about what my superpower is. I would say synchronicity, like kind of pulling things together to make a new thing.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, synthesis
Yeah.
and synchronicity. It's both. It's both. So what would you say yours is?
I think my superpower is storytelling and like, well, not even just storytelling, because that's like could almost put me in a novel, but it's communication just in general. And I'm a dot connector, right? So I absolutely love pattern recognition and then taking something that's complex and making it simple through communication. So whether I'm speaking or writing or whatever modality that is, like self-expression is what I always like to say is probably my superpower.
That's great. And that's because you have that theory, the power method. And so breaking that down in very digestible forms is what really helps people. And you also shared stories from your coaching clients.
Yes.
And I thought that was really interesting too, because you incorporated that like therapeutic element as well.
One of my favorite ones is the woman that I worked with who was super successful but unfulfilled because she was chasing wealth. But another value of hers was like nutrition and care and like it, but it just kind of got put to the side, but it was forming like this guilt loop because she wasn't nurturing one of her top values. She was just chasing wealth. But long story short, once she like was able to see those things and then also add some dancing, some fun creative element into her life, like her whole life changed. Like she returned to her radiance, right? And like as a result, like she got healthier, she got wealthier, she got, happier, like all of the things. And like I'm just sitting here like looking at her like this is amazing.
I love that because she would dance. And you also talk about like music, and also your parents were musicians, and
Yes.
music is very important to you. And you talk about your kind of song to listen to get you going is How Will I Know by Whitney Houston.
So fun.
I'm trying to think what mine is. It probably used to be like Journey or something
Yes.
like that.
So
Or
fun to have those anchor songs though. And even when I'm in a more mellow mood, my mellow song is it Into the Mystic by Van Morrison? Is that what it's called? I think it's Into the Mystic. But yeah, I mean, I have my anchor songs to bring me back.
it's so good. So, what do you want people to most come away from this book with?
I think one of the biggest takeaways I would someone to know is that you do have this thing called radiance and that it's not just a fancy book title or a term. When I think of radiance, I think of us being like one part ourselves, like one part Becca, one part Estelle, one part our soul, and then one part infinite intelligence. And so if you think about that, if you just stop and think about that, that means we're two-thirds cosmic. And we spend so much time in this one third trying to control a narrative, trying to make the best outcomes, and we're relying on our small self instead of our big self. And so, what I want people to think about with this book and what's possible for them is like returning to your radiance means you're embracing that two-thirds of infinite possibility back into your life. You get to release some of the stress of having to control everything and surrender some of that to something that might be a little more wiser than you. And so that theory of knowing that radiance is available to you and that you can return to it is what I want people to know.
It's kind of like trust, having trust in the universe, right? I used to be, when is this going to happen? When is it going to happen? I have to make it happen. I have to like overdo and overthink, and I'm a doer. And I just started, I think when I became a mother, I started having a little bit more trust, like, oh, it's going to work out, or oh, it's going to
Yes,
happen. And that made me easier for people to be around because I wasn't so brittle. So, that
exactly.
whole thing. And I think it's made me easier on myself as well, although I'm still hard on myself. But
Same. Like
I
guilty.
know. What is that? I don't know. That's the other superpower. I guess it fuels us to get things done, you
Yeah, I
know.
have the overachiever. She will always be a part of me. So I've just accepted her at this point.
Yeah, you just accept and support and be
Yeah,
like, okay, but there's more to life.
exactly. Like maybe you should be in the back seat today. No.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to share?
I don't necessarily think so, but for the listeners, I want you to know that like if you're wanting to return back to that sparkle in you, that the book is very palatable. Like we've been talking about that, but it has everything in there from, we've talked about boundaries to values to how you can shift your meaning. You can do that. You can shift your own meaning to things. Like when I realized that, I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. Like I didn't know I had that power. So there's just like lots of little things in the book that could really be a big perception shift for you.
Yeah. And I love in part three, where you're talking about waken your worthiness, just some of the chapters. Chapter 11, activate your personal power. Chapter 12, the seeds of faith.
Oh,
And you
that
give an
chapter's
example
beautiful.
about your grandmother telling you about a mustard seed and,
Yes.
trusting kind of in it that it will grow. And that's part of faith as well, right?
Yes, exactly.
And then chapter 13, bear, hug, uncomfortable. So give a little explanation of that one.
Yeah, I love that one because it was one of those things that really started to change my life. Change is inevitable. We're always evolving, and we might think we know what's going on, and you can get a phone call in 2 minutes from now that changes your life, good or bad, right? And what I have learned, and, Estelle, you mentioned that I've had a lot of loss in my family. So I'm not just someone who's had success, I've also had substantial loss. And regardless of what side of it, I have realized that good things do come. And again, change is inevitable. So it was like that what if question to myself. What if I bear hugged the uncomfortable? What if I allowed that uncomfortable to hug me back and be like, girl, it's going to be okay. Let's take that first step. Let's do it together. And so I say bear hug and comfortable because I feel like there's an opportunity for life to hug us back, and we can go into the unknown with a little more reassurance that it's going to be okay.
Yeah. It's so wonderful how you meld the spiritual and the practical in this book because, it definitely has that spiritual component, which I think we all need, but it gives these specific steps that you could take wherever you're at. And then chapter 14, unlock abundance, and chapter 15, believe it to see it. And just so much about vibration and energy and yoga. And you had studied Kundalini yoga.
Yeah.
And you even talk about gratitude and radical commitment and leadership and legacy and values, really getting from a place of maybe darkness where there's no
Yeah.
radiance to a place where you're giving out to the world what you want to
Ooh,
put
I got the
out there.
goosebumps.
I like that. Then you
Like,
get
woo!
goosebumps. And then you get it back in
Yes.
abundance. So
Yeah.
it's beautiful, a return to radiance. And I'm so excited to see what you're, going to do next. Although this is definitely for the long term, for the next 2 years,
Yes.
something very important that you are going to continue to share the message of.
Thank you for being such a supporter.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's great having you on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Follow me at estelleserasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.